Welcome back to Biomed Buddy. Today we're going to talk about the computer section in the STA Compact. First, let's go through the list of components. All these components are located in the PC rack on the left-hand side of the instrument. Just as a reminder, to get to the PC rack, you pry off the 4 little buttons in each corner, unscrew the screw, and the side of the unit goes straight up and is removable. After that, there's 4 screws that go into a steel plate, which removes that steel plate, which gives you access to the PC rack. From there, remove 4 screws, you'll have access to all the components within the PC rack, which consist of an 8-slot backplane board, a 486 PC board, a 4-port serial board, possibly a VGA board, a hard disk drive, a cable going to the hard disk drive, 1 input-output control board, and a cable going to the floppy disk drive. Main function of this unit, it simply handles all of the STA Compact software. Communicates with the user through the use of the keyboard and the monitor. Now let's go through each board individually. We're going to start out with an 8-slot backplane, which uses the following power supplies along with the rest of the boards within the PC rack, which are the 5 volts, the plus 12 volts, and the negative 12 volts. On the 8-slot backplane board, you will see 3 diodes that indicate all of these power supplies are okay. D1 is the 5 volts, D2 is the plus 12, D3 is the negative 12. I have never seen any issues with the 8-slot backplane board. It simply communicates between the 486 on the input-output control board, the 4-port serial board, and possibly the VGA board. Now on to the 486 PC board. Again, it uses the same power supplies, plus 5 volts, plus 12 volts, and negative 12 volts. Most of them have a controller for your VGA monitor. It also has a controller for the hard disk drive and the floppy disk drive. And it ensures a serial link for their host computer, your LIS system. For the most part, if the CPU 486 PC board fails, nothing in the instrument works. You will not get a boot up, probably no monitor, or no keyboard action. Sometimes the monitor section, the VGA controller, can fail on itself. Sometimes the controller to the hard disk can fail on its own. Simple test for that is to see if the instrument boots up. If it boots up, meaning the DOS prompt, you can pretty much assure that your 486 PC board is working okay, which leads you to the hard disk drive. Pretty much an off-the-shelf hard drive, and it controls STA software and the DOS 6.2 software. In general, by taking the cable and changing the connector on the cable and going through the setup, the BIOS setup, you can change this unit so that it will boot up using the floppy disk drive. Put in the 6.2 software, run ScanDisk. If ScanDisk works fine, you can assume that your hard disk drive is okay. You can also put in a service disk and go directly to ScanDisk through the DOS prompts, which you get to by going through the service menu. We will discuss that at a later point. Now on to the 4-port serial board. The 4-port serial board communicates through series connectors to the following boards: 4-axis board, measurement CPU board, positive identification board, and the DC motors control board. Port 1 is for the 4-axis board. Port 2 is the measurement CPU. Port 3 is the positive identification. Port 4, DC motors. You can see all of these ports through the picture on the right-hand side of this program. The 4-port serial board communicates to the 4-axis board using port 1, COM2. Communicates to the measurement CPU board using port 2, COM3. Communicates to the positive identification board using port 3, COM4. Communicates to the DC motors using port 4, COM5. The 4-port serial board, in general, when it fails, your monitor will still work, although it may be very slow because the CPU is trying to communicate with another section of the instrument, such as the 4-axis board, measurement CPU, the positive identification board, or the DC motors. So it generally works slower. If you can type on the keyboard and in general DOS prompt comes up, but you get a communication error, the 4-port serial board would be a suspect. In general, as a clue, a lot of times when you check out the 4-port serial board using the service menu, you'll find that kind of like everything doesn't quite work like you expect. You see no problems being addressed in the identification boards. You see it will not map, things of this nature. It's pretty much cut and dry where the monitor works. The keyboard seems to work, but you get a timeout or a communication error of some sort. But it pretty much downs the instrument. Generally, it's not an intermittent issue, but I have seen it at times be somewhat intermittent, but for the most part repeatable. Point being, most of the time it's an obvious failure of the 4-port serial board. Input-output control board. It uses the 5 volts power supply. It communicates between the 486 PC board and the input-output board. It also generates signals for the Velcor pump, along with several signals for different input-output board buffers. I/O card, when it fails, most of the time you'll get multi-failures. Sometimes it's hard to see because the monitor will only display the first error that comes up. This typical one I would see would be something that would be abnormal, would be the front door being not in place, and if you cleared that, right after that you'd see the fluidic bottles being missed. And if you resolve that in some manner, you'd see the next error. That's generally an indication of the I/O control board. In other words, multi-input and output devices are failing. Again, that is somewhat hard to see because of just the nature of how the instrument runs. Thank you very much for attending this session of the Biomed training program on the STA Compact.